I'm thrilled to be here to support Hedera again after a number of years of working closely with Wes on all sorts of sustainability-related initiatives, and also super privileged to be back on stage at another COP with many of the same panelists that I've been privileged to interview in the past about the very same topic, no less. And so I think, especially because I know both Catherine and Liv have some place to be later on today, we'll just dive right in. And what I would love to start with, and maybe Catherine will lead with you. Can you just give us a status report on the ESG disclosure landscape and the technology? And the technology and legal aspects that have changed in the last 12 months. Where are we now? It's been a busy year since we met in Baku, and I'd love to hear your perspective on what the state of the market looks like.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's like the band is back together. It is great to be here today, and I want to thank the Hedera Foundation for this event and just more generally for being such mavericks and also just committed players in the sustainability and climate space about advancing technology for greater impact. So love being part of the broader family. So as Wes mentioned, in California, I'm an attorney, and I have had the opportunity to kind of be right in the middle of the sort of creating the forcing functions for disclosure, which the way I see disclosure is it's really a means to an end. We need to catalyze new climate markets, and we're only going to do that when we create forcing functions for innovation and scale. And so disclosure is one tool in the toolbox. And so I will say just from the beginning, we're starting to see how disclosure comes together with other compliance markets to really begin to unlock the kind of change that we need. And we're seeing that in the Article 6 conversation. But when it comes to disclosure, we've been doing our work in California. We no longer say I'm from the United States. We say I'm from California. So I do benefit from that. And so we've been trying to hold up our end of the bargain by putting in place 2 disclosure laws, as Jonathan said, both for climate risk and GHG emissions reporting. And I had a chance to write one of those and work on both of them throughout the process. And I would say, we're, interestingly enough, on track to be the first large-scale disclosure compliance requirement globally, because we still have 2026 on the calendar. So we're kind of that, stealth move. So everybody talks about CSRD and ISSB, and I am absolutely clear that, global and large-scale disclosure and regulatory regimes are important, but California is the 4th largest economy. And so, we have basically every large U.S. corporation will have to report into California. So, the critical piece of that is that first reporting will be in 2026. It's going to be kind of messy. I mean, we have, we think about what else is out there, CSRD in the EU. There's some fits and starts. And in some ways, I would say it was a pretty big Christmas tree of reporting. And so I think that there is a little bit of kind of, let's winnow it down, let's figure out what really matters, and that's happening right now. And that reporting is going to happen the next couple of years as well. So I think what we're seeing is, do we have this, is anything that we're talking about, just completely integrated, interoperable? No. But I think we're all working very hard to create sort of a quilt of different drivers for higher quality data to create new markets. So I would say, right now I would give ourselves sort of in the B range for that work. And, I'm excited to talk about, what disclosure does and doesn't do. But I think right now, what I'm hearing from corporations, and I know you can talk about that from KPMG, is, whether they're talking about it or not, they know that they are going to be subject to a range of things. Whether that's disclosure, CSRD, ISSB in a country that adopts it, California, whether it's the carbon border adjustment mechanism, whether it's the carbon markets more generally, those large corporations recognize that this is, data infrastructure and data reporting is here to stay. And so I think we have a we have a lot to work with right now.
Absolutely. So, David, why don't you take it from there? Catherine mentioned the companies or clients that you work with on a regular basis in your role at KPMG. There's this sense, Catherine also kind of alluded to the political shift in the U.S. We in the U.S., especially those of us that care about climate, have a tendency to view the shift there as catastrophic for the climate. But the U.S. economy is just one part of a much broader and larger global picture. And since you are sitting in at a sort of high perch with an international remit, I'd love you to give a sense of what the disclosure environment looks like, both mandatory and voluntary, from your client's perspective on a global scale.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And before I start, again, great to be back. Being part of this platform, and thank you again to Hedera for putting this together. I remarked earlier to Wes, this has to be the coolest vibe of all the places here in Belém. So I'll always enjoy coming here. I think I think Catherine really said it in some of her last points. The reality is, and I often get asked this question, with the political winds and the changes that have taken place in the United States, how has that affected our U.S. business? And I would say largely not significantly. And I would say in many respects, and kudos to Catherine, the work that you've done, California is a very big driver, right, of that. And the recognition that whether they're talking about it or not, companies, large corporates, they've seen the change in administrations over the years, right? They play the long game, right? And they understand that this is here to stay, that the broader trend is and the need is to scale markets, and disclosure, as you said, Catherine, is only one tool within the broader toolbox, but it very much it's something on their agendas. And I think that constellation, that there's on the standards side, there's this kind of alphabet soup, and there's movement clearly towards some degree of convergence and, hopefully not uniformity, but interoperability. And I've already heard that word mentioned a number of times. But in terms of some of the principal drivers, we're actually seeing, I haven't heard the Australian ASRS, the IFRS equivalent, we're seeing a lot of work that's coming out of there. Interesting, IFRS is interesting in terms of how we're seeing clients positioning around it, because it's very much focused on the integration and alignment of sustainability with financial data and financial and accounting standards. And that's definitely a big driver for the clients that we're working with and supporting. I would say the interesting thing that I've noticed in terms of our clients, they have tended to, for IFRS compliance, to be focused more on the qualitative as a first year versus the requirements around financial effects reporting, which they need to get up to speed on very, very quickly, right? So there's definitely a heavy lift that's going to be required. But again, I think that the point that I want to leave everyone with is, by and large, whether companies are talking about it, we really have not seen a large shift in terms of how what their long-term strategies are, how they're setting themselves up, how they're investing in their data and digital architectures, their platforms, the controls, the processes that they need to be able to get at that kind of audit-grade information for disclosure, whether it be on the voluntary or on the compliance side.
Terrific. And if it really is true that the sort of predominant sense on the part of these C-suites and chief sustainability officers is that we have to just forge ahead, then we should drill down into digital, because digital is going to be necessary And of course, it's a Hedera event, and we would be remiss to not talk about the value of blockchain, but and other digital tools. But if we're going to be able to be successful in implementation, then we need the advantages that the digital provides. So why don't at this point, I'm sure all three of you would have some great things to talk about that, but I'd love to move to Liv. I know, Liv, you've been involved in some really exciting work for your whole career, but especially initially, you have your SME Data Unlock Initiative. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because it seems like a really exciting perspective on how to increase investment in digital infrastructure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we can hear me. First of all, I got to thank Hedera, and want to give a little quote before that. Is that what really excites me is distributed ledger technology that can help getting data and standardization of data and digitize the processes, because I also want to emphasize to everybody, we talk about carbon accounting, and I keep telling everybody we are doing carbon counting. There is no accounting there, because we don't have the same financial system like a debit and a credit, or a way for rules to be able to be applied so this data can be assurable and audited. So when we come to the infrastructure of distributed ledger and blockchain and those kind of things, we're actually now being able to verify data from the source and create assurable and auditable data. So remember, we're only doing accounting today. We are not doing accounting. And it's a very key point that I want to emphasize. And that's why, and I get to the DSD project here in a second, is that if we really truly going to get the whole economy along, not just the big 150,000 companies that might get impacted by ISSB, there are 400 million SMEs that gets impacted by the big companies. And if we don't bring them along, we're leaving a whole economy behind. And with distributed ledger and standardization, we might be able to, if we can get the policies and the regulators to agree to create a trust framework, because SMEs cannot collect, neither have they the experience to prepare this data. What we need is a different way of thinking, so that this data already sits with the utility company, it sits with the environmental agency, it sits with the water companies. Why can't the SMEs just self-select to make that data available on a platform like Hedera with distributed ledger, and then create an analytical layer that ties that data to either the EU taxonomy or other market needs, and allow these companies to be able to then say, I want to share this data with them, with the suppliers, with the companies. Because why are we going through so much pain right now, or kind of regression with standards? It's because companies don't know how to get the data. I was talking to one of the largest companies in IT who took, for example, the CSRD, the FRAG standard, and they had 1,200 data points, and they had created 4 columns. The first column, ching ching, we got that data. Next column, I bet Catherine got that hidden somewhere, but let's call her. Third is, let's put a research team and look where we can maybe get that data. And then the 4th column, have no clue where that data is. When over 200 data points for some of the largest, most efficient companies don't exist for the requirement that are being put in place, that's why we're seeing a lot of this pushback, because we got to think about the data as part of this. So that's what we, Catherine and I, are on the mission to create and work, utilize distributed ledger like Hedera, to be able to connect all assurable data from the source, so that SME can also be part of this transitional economy. So again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thankful to the Hedera for this innovation and the Guardian framework to innovate and continue to contribute to standardizing data, digitizing the infrastructure so we can bring the whole economy along.
Amazing. Let me just ask, I don't know that we've ever talked about this before, so Catherine, David, Liv, you can refuse to answer, but you know, with digitization and the kind of transparency that digital provides, especially as we're responding to regulatory mandates, there is a risk on the other end in domains like digital privacy, right? I mean, you're now collecting in an automated fashion, sometimes identifiable, personally identifiable information about vast numbers of individuals, lots of sensitive domains, and you have EU GDPR style concerns that come into play. I'm not sure who would like to take this first, but I'd love to understand how, from whichever perspective, the tension between privacy and the kind of transparency necessary for climate plays out.
Gentlemen first.
Yeah,
It's a new era.
I don't know if I have a full answer to that, but I think it's absolutely it is an issue, right? And particularly more so in certain jurisdictions, particularly in the EU, as you mentioned. I think it becomes another, I don't know, bump in the road, if you will, along with the host of other legal compliant risks, right? Or at least perceived risks that corporates and their, general counsel office, right, will raise concerns around the disclosure of that information into the public domain or even into regulators. So I don't know if I flagged the fact that yes, it is a risk, it is an issue. I just wanted to offer a comment around the previous discussion around the importance of digital, right? And I think from my standpoint, I've been a big fan and supporter of Hedera over the years and the work that you do, because I think it very much goes towards what we need is, I often express it, and maybe kind of trite to say, but digital intelligence is climate intelligence, right? And we need digitally enabled disclosure, right? And that comes through standards around digital tagging, digitalization of the actual attributes, et cetera. And I think you're starting to see organizations, large corporates increasingly start to move beyond kind of the legacy. We need to move beyond spreadsheets that are siloed across the organizations to ERP systems, right, with some more automation, to actually looking at how do we have these kind of shared interoperable data and digital platforms that allow for the seamless exchange of information. How that then, this question of privacy and how that relates in it, I don't have the full answer to it, but I think from the need in terms of, I think this is where we're absolutely seeing more and more corporates kind of get attuned to the fact that they can tap into these infrastructures that effectively everyone in this room is innovating and has been building for many, many, many years. But I think I've also, for many years, experienced the pain of legal and raising their concerns for other legal risks in addition to the privacy dimension. So.
I'll just jump in and note that, on behalf of all those lawyers out there who do not consider ourselves to be red light lawyers, a strong counsel's office in a major corporate, for example, will enable the kinds of initiatives that you're all talking about, not find ways to, suggest the risk is so great to do nothing. But I do think, and maybe this is where Catherine jumps in, it really does become a question of what sort of legal infrastructure we need to build in order to enable the initiatives in climate, because at the same time that we're concerned about privacy and AI in the EU now, these forms of tech will help us in climate, but they will bring their own concomitant risks, and we need to be careful that, you know, we're not going to get dead in the water in one domain because of the concerns of another.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and then I'll let Liv speak, because as our resident Norwegian, she's very passionate about where data gets stored. So I'll let her talk about data storage. But I'd just like to make a distinction when it comes to data privacy. We obviously as a society have decided that we need transparency on GHG emissions and climate risk, right? And that is a, you know, that balancing test, you know, it tips in favor of transparency. So I think that where transparency and where privacy is really important, I find, is with all of the value chain and how are we going to get them to be part of this solution set. And so I do think that ensuring that we have the regulatory environment to protect the privacy of certain data is important, and that most important is really also that people feel they have power over their data. And I think to me, that's one of the themes that is kind of underreported, or we don't frame it well, because we talk a lot about, you know, we all need to get in this together and do our stuff, but we don't really say, this is your data, for instance, for SMEs. This is your data, and we're going to show you that sharing your data actually gets you something. Because what happens all too often is corporations take data, they monetize it, and everybody in the value chain rarely sees the benefit. So I think that by showing that sharing data translates into green finance, translates into opportunities in the carbon markets, allows you to be competitive because you can disclose, to me, that is, you know, an equally important part of that we have to have the regulatory environment and then the proof points that you get something from it. So I think that's what we all need to do together, and that's what we're trying to do with the SME Data Unlock. But certainly we need to do a big, I mean, I would say one thing too, I think innovators tend to just run past regulation. So I would just say that as a general matter, not just in the blockchain world, but generally it's like, we're frustrated that these systems aren't working for us, and so we want to blow past them. And I think what we're seeing again and again, you know, if you look at the COP conversations, people try to run ahead of it, and then they get brought back by it, and we start losing our credibility. So I think we're we're maturing, where we recognize that, you know, it's great in the last panel, the moderator talked about, you know, 6.4 and saying, you know, in the EU, it's coming, guys. The methodology is gonna have to be a 6.4 methodology. I think we're seeing that over time, that is gonna be what's gonna drive this.
Liv?
Yeah, I would love to add this discussion. Hello? Okay, here we go. As Catherine said, it's not just about the privacy of the data that kind of concerns them, and I agree with you that there is education to educate them that you own your data, but sharing it would actually have economic value. But I think one of the biggest issue is, where is the data stored? And I think even the big four will say, there's been in the news quite a bit, that, you know, countries don't want to share their data when there is an audit of international companies. So I think, and the US coming out with the Data Act that says that with probable cause they can access the data, and no matter where the data is, as long as it sits within a US company. So we have not just, you know, that issue, but we need to come up with a trust framework, because the Data Act in America actually says that they can access the data, and not everybody wants Americans to look at our data or come and get our data from Norway. Is that we got to be careful how these legislations are developed, so that the data, that even if the SMEs or anybody submit that data, that they have the right to that data, and no government can come in and say, thank you, now I take all your data. So I think the regulatory, for the lawyers with the red pens, you have some work to do to help drive that global dialogue on this topic, and the big four as well, because at the end of the day, they are the one that go in and audit and assures this data, no matter where it's at in the world, and is held accountable if something goes wrong. So we do need a trust framework that allows companies to share their data, but we also need to be able to have that trust that the data is actually stored in a place where they have legal rights to it and not some other country having access to that data just because they want to. So we got some problems to solve, and that means probably we get together again next year.
I'm game if you are. Although if all the problems were suddenly solved, I think we'd have a party and could let others, mount the stage here. But what I'm Liv, what I'm hearing you saying is that the challenge is not a sort of tech readiness issue or a innovation issue. It is one of policymakers getting together and understanding what the technology enables and finding ways to avoid challenges, remove blockages, things like that. Have I got it correct?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look, for example, at Denmark, once the US Data Act came out, they basically went out and said, okay, we're going to innovate ourselves so that we can store our data in local, solutions where we control. So I think we're at a very critical point right now that these issues are going to start creeping up more and more, and we got to get ahead of them.
So everyone in this room obviously is a big supporter of the enabling potential of blockchain and DLT tools like provided by Hedera and the Hedera Guardian. But I feel a little bit remiss, at least in my circle, there is just an endless discussion about AI, and I'd love to get the panel's perspective on how problems like those that Liv just mentioned and many others, for example, the fragmentation of standards, right, that we're now experiencing, right? You have, and the fragmentation of different compliance regimes, California, CSRD, many others. Let's have, David, sorry, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Let's have you weigh in. I mean, is it just a fad, or is AI really providing your clients with a real tool in partnership with tools like those that Hedera provides to solve some of these problems, at least as we wait for the regulators to do the work that really needs to be done? Because I should just note, it's a pretty tall order, because no matter how fantastic a policy, a lobbyist or a reg strategist might be in one jurisdiction, you're dealing with dozens and dozens. And as I think everyone who attends COP knows, years and years of effort by earnest and well-meaning people still doesn't always result in the coordination that we hope for.
Yeah, so AI. Okay, obviously a lot of hype around AI. Every client that we work with across sectors wants to do AI, right? What that means to them means very different things. And I think I would characterize, we've seen some successes, particularly around, applications around analytics, data integrity, those kinds of things. Very repeatable business process. I think there's still a gap between the hype and the reality from an innovation standpoint in terms of how most organizations are kind of realizing the benefits. So I think that there's certainly, there's the hype, there's the retraction, and then at some point there will be a settling. But I think with what AI, and maybe just to link it to a point that Liv was making around, the trust and the data, and ultimately you need to think about these data pipelines, right? And the data flow from, project operations, project to regulators, to auditors, to investors. One of the challenges, and just, I am not, I deal with our audit side of our business. I am not an auditor per se. Done a lot of audits in my time, but I'm not a CPA. But one of the issues that I think will be increasingly important going forward is to have what I'll call digital auditors, right? Auditors that can actually go in and how do you provide assurance over a data pipeline, an AI model, right? A digital passport or a digital wallet, right? So we can talk about how you can apply these, you could digitalize, you could tokenize, you could monetize, and the potential of that. But we're going to try and bring this into mainstream existing, legacy architectures. We're going to immediately start to bump up against that. And I can tell you, you know, I sit within a big four. I've worked for a number of other big fours over the course of my career. They're all circling around this question, right? And looking at it, and how do we get internally the kind of comfort that effectively we could opine and publicly attest to information that's provided in a digital form. But, you know, if standards of various forms aren't there, the audit is always in reference to an established and accepted standard, right? So you will never find, I will tell you, and I'm sure that both of you can attest to this as well, you will never find an audit partner who is willing to step out beyond the requirement, okay? So I think that's a big issue that we need to, and is being looked at, but certainly will need to be addressed going forward.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that and say, as we know, garbage in, garbage out. So God bless us, but we're all here because the data, we don't have good data. So we can't blame AI for not solving our problems, right? So I think that it's just a sequencing issue, but I'm going to be a little bit more of the maximalist here. AI is going to revolutionize everything we do eventually. Are we applying AI to the things where we can get the biggest impact? Not necessarily. As we know, climate doesn't create rewards in the race right now for, I mean, we're sort of, in some ways, AI is a little bit like, you know, DLT and blockchain. There was all this infrastructure focus, and you couldn't get anybody except for what was then HBAR, now Hedera, to actually say climate sustainability is going to be a use case, and we're going to actually invest in it. Most of the other, you know, entities were not doing that. And I think we're seeing the same thing right now with AI. But I think AI, I mean, to me right now, when it comes to reporting, the standards are so low, and I mean, we have to realize policymakers can only go so far. As long as you have to know what the source of the data is, but we don't have a big driver for better data that AI could then, you know, be monetized and for which there is a market. But I do, the bright spots that I do see, simple in reporting, like error detection, that there's going to be, we're going to see that. That's not a big lift. Like, if-then analysis, no. We're not going to see that until we have much better data. We have to have huge amounts of data. That's why we're doing all this. I do think emissions factors, I think we're already seeing some innovation and some improvement in that, like, we need much better emissions factors if we're going to move to much more granular data, and I think AI is going to help us do that. I'm already seeing some companies actually taking startups seriously that are going to allow them to develop product carbon footprints. I think that's where you're going to see the biggest driver for high quality data, for which there is a market. And so I think obviously when that's a perfect DLT application, but it's also a great AI application. So I think we see the future in it, but right now it's like the squeeze is not that great.
I add to that. I am. Oh, here we go. There you go. Talk about what's not the big lift, and why am I excited to be at Hedera and The Guardian is that if we used AI, because it's important to remember that the companies are not just using that data for some disclosure or to a supply chain. I did a research on a company, a big bank, in fact, in the UK. It's published by Institute of Management Accountants, is that one of those data points goes to 18 different repository of regulators that's asking for it. It's not just in the annual report. It goes to 14 websites all over, right? So these data points. So when I see AI opportunity and excited about what Hedera and Guardian has done is that what if we had AI and the rules within ISSB, AFRAG, GRI protocol embedded in there and use AI to automatically help these companies map that data to the right disclosure forms and be able to tag that to XBRL taxonomies. If you don't know what XBRL is, it's an open data format that I'm one of the founders of that is now mandated for regulatory reporting for banking, insurance, capital market, and business registries. If we could do that, and use AI, not a heavy lifting, domain experts in the room, we can actually help these companies meet all of their demands, not just one use case at a time. And I think that's an exciting part where AI can be in the short term. Now, AI is overhyped. As long as you see AI, it's like, oh, you must be cool. It's like back in the day when you could write a web page, you know, and oh, you know HTML, you know, you're going to change the world. We are at a very hype now, but if we can find the real non-lift, big lift to really demonstrate that goes down to the quality of the data. And if you look at Hedera and Guardian, it is about bringing auditable, assurable data. So we have a great foundation to start building on that, helping companies automate their reporting, because it isn't just the reporting that's the problem, it's capturing the data all the way throughout the supply chain. So I'm excited about opportunities for AI in that space, but I can sit here and talk about other use cases, but I think this one is something that can have huge impact and controlled environment. I think Wes just said enough is enough.
Wes was saying that we need to jump to some Q&A, which we'll do. I just wanted to I suppose it's a good segue for me. You know, I don't want us to be too critical of hype. We should be mindful of the fact that we're in you know, a blockchain session right now, and you know, this space has been beset by hype. But what I think that Wes and Hedera have proven is that, notwithstanding the fact that there can be a lot of unfulfilled promises and grandiose ideas, you know, when you work diligently year after year, building real value, you know, you can solve actual concrete business problems with these tools that never could be solved before. I suspect that AI will be the same. And what we should be mindful of, though, is just as you're seeing in the EU now with the EU's AI Act, you know, every new tech, as it gets deployed, it becomes more powerful. Compliance obligations will increase, risks will increase, and so we're going to be you know, working together to design the kind of legal architecture that both enables and protects, right? And I guess with that, we'll go to the audience. Or Wes has to ask the question because you know, he yeah, pushed us into the Q&A.
Part of the reason I wanted to go to Q&A is I have a pointed question. So my pointed question is maybe going back. I want to maybe point back to Catherine and start there. Is Europe pushed back its disclosure timelines, but Europe also is forcing disclosures on countries importing. What would your advice be from a technology perspective? And I hope everyone on the panel thinks about this maybe from an audit perspective, a technology perspective, but also the challenges. What would your advice to the countries be? What tools should they use today? And what problems will they run in tomorrow if they don't?
Don't you love a softball, right?
Yeah. Love that. You mean the countries that are going to have corporations reporting into the EU, or the EU countries?
Importing to the EU, and then reporting.
Well, I mean, I think actually, I do think CBAM is super powerful. When it comes to CSRD, I mean, I think that you've got a pretty high bar. I do think that if you're in a member state, you're going to have to think about what those companies are going to be subject to a lot of legal scrutiny. So we've talked a lot about the regulation, but I think we are moving into a risk management, you know, whole new world. And so I think we have, I think it's yet to be seen, and I don't think that companies are just beginning to get other parts of their companies involved in this. I mean, it's really been sort of the chief sustainability officers, hasn't been legal, it hasn't been the chief financial officer. So I guess we haven't seen what the lobbying is going to look like in country, but I do think when it comes to CBAM, that's one I think is a real game changer. I actually think that more than anything else, that is going to drive new markets. It's going to drive real decarbonization and the creation of a whole new financing system that also is going to use much better data than we've ever had before. So I think if you were a country right now, what I'm seeing is all those countries subject to CBAM are now having to create their own ETS systems. I mean, it was a pretty artful regulation because it's pushing sort of a globalization of something which otherwise we would not be able to get to.
I will answer that actually, but you
Yep.
talk first.
I think, well, I can give you, I guess my answer is, and to tie back into what a comment they made at the outset around companies taking the art of the long view on this. I think, CBAM, I fully agree, like transformative in terms of a demand driver. I think organizations are seeing that, these kinds of trade regimes, these trade mechanisms, as well as the broader landscape, obviously we saw the retrenchment today in terms of CSRD and the threshold levels and that, but ultimately where things are going, I think there's a recognition that you can build today using legacy technologies, legacy infrastructures, or you can look at kind of where things are going, where the technology is, both today and where it's going to be going in the future. And they're very much looking at these kind of advanced technologies. And I'll just give you some examples right now, and with companies that we're supporting in the Global South that are subject to import requirements around CBAM, and right from the get-go, it is blockchain-based. They're looking at the environmental attributes, social attributes of their product. They're digitalizing them with a recognition that they need it for the compliance purposes, but also, to your point, right, that they've got a myriad of other players that are looking for that information, and effectively, if they digitalize it, they can also use, permissioned access and distribution to be able to kind of share that. The change in terms of timelines, for them, it's stay the course. They are saying, this is what is going to happen. Maybe it's a little bit longer than we originally anticipated, but this is the future, and so they're really just not necessarily doubling down, they're just continuing to say, hey, we've already kind of read, I'm Canadian, this is where the puck is going, right? And kind of staying the course.
I'm going to be very short on that. I think that these companies needs to look at that ERP system and things like that. They need to start looking at the tokenized economy. How is this industry, how is that impacting you? And that's where it's heading. And so it's not just about carbon, it's all kind of data and assets that needs to be part of that tokenization. So I could dig into this for hours, but I won't because Wes is over there now. We moved one step closer, but that is my recommendation.
So I have maybe Darren Wolfberg, co-founder, CEO of Triangle. So I'm maybe going to play this a step further, okay? We have the new carbon measures program. To me, in some ways, it is the movement of the responsibility of the producer and their carbon to ultimately the consumer. Yep. Okay? Now, we have the EU food and apparel labeling requirements, and so we envision a world where every barcode, SKU, RFID tag has not only the name of the item, the description of the item, the price of the item, but now the footprint of the item. And so talking about that tokenized economy, where now the consumer, they're at the grocery store, they're at the bookstore, wherever they are, that those items go through the point of sale system and they're going to see how much cash is due and how much carbon is due. And so my question to you is, how far out is that? Where do you see, obviously, EPD data flowing into each of these barcode SKUs, RFID tags? What are the hurdles to achieve that? Or is this just a matter of time?
I actually see that lower income, medium economies are much more, can leap ahead. And I think there is a huge opportunity. It's one of the reasons why Catherine and I in our strategy is focused on lower income, medium income countries, because they have nothing to lose. When you get into bigger countries and bigger policies and those kind of things, they will come along when they see something else happen. I'll give an example on that. I couldn't get anybody to believe in digital reporting 30 years ago, but when China stepped up and said, this is great, we're going to do it. The next week, we got a phone call from SSC. China's got it, we got to be there first. So how do we create, and back then, they were, a closed market. They were opening up their market. They needed data. So answering your question, I think we have to start where there are less barrier and these countries to showcase what good looks like.
So I'm not going to speculate on timing. I really have no idea on that. But maybe I said it earlier, kind of the way I look at the world is through this lens in terms of the potential is, digitalize, tokenize, monetize, right? Like everyone here, is well versed and directly involved in building out the digitalize and the tokenize, right? The markets, the demand drivers on the monetization, the business case needs to be there, right? There are all kinds of innovations, fantastic innovations, and maybe they're not even innovations anymore, right? But I would say, how many large corporates right now are looking at, offsets and looking at, the traditional, they've got carbon offsets, they've got RECs, they've got traditional mechanisms, they understand it, they've been doing it for a number of years, right? You come along and say, listen, we can create a digital wallet for you, right? That allows you to have essentially digitally equivalent asset classes so you can have broader diversification within your portfolio. Right? The potential there is today. For that is it's there today, right? It can be done, right? The level of familiarity, the business case, like why would we do anything different from what we've historically done? That is like that's where the friction is, and it's a human dimension versus a technology, right? So. How quickly, so that's why I don't want to opine or speculate in terms of timeline. I'd like to see it obviously nearer term than longer term, but I think we've got to get over that human dimension in terms of familiarity and comfort to be able to really speed and scale this up.
Darren, it was great to see you. I remember meeting you at, I think, COP26, and thank you for the work that you've been doing early on, and it's tough sledding, but so important. I would just say, if you'd asked me a couple years ago, I'd be like, everything's going to have a barcode in 5 years. It's just because we all want it. I think one of the things we've realized is we have a very soft global consumer demand for green products. Let's be real, right? And what people are willing to pay for them is, as we well know, everything is about affordability now. So what I would say, because I do think in the end of the day, the consumers will drive this, I think we have to be very smart about the verticals. So I think textiles, anything that Gen Z purchases, I think electronics that are, I think consumer-facing industries is where we're going to see the biggest drive for product carbon footprints, which are in the same stream as having a QR code. So I really feel like that, and obviously CBAM does the same thing in the places where consumers aren't really driving it. So I really think that those, in those verticals is where the action will be seen.
So, Darren, thank you for the great question. Wes, thank you for your question as well. With that, I think for time, we're a wrap. Catherine, David, Liv, pleasure as always, and maybe it will be our pleasure next year as well. We'll see.
We'll be so good at disclosure next year, it'll be done. We'll just be talking about markets. Okay?
Well, we'll
I want
open
to
a
be out
bottle
of
of
a
wine.
job.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.